Hey y'all, so today I'm going to be doing a bit of a discussion on book formatting and book covers, and the idea to do this video came from a Tuesday Talks topic that will be in a couple weeks. I don't think it's covering everything that I'm going to be talking about in this video, but it definitely got me thinking about it, and so I will leave a link down in the description to their Goodreads group for Tuesday Talks. So for the book formats, I'm going to be focusing on what I believe are the three most common and most prevalent book formats, and I'm going to run through them really quickly so that no one gets confused with the terminology. So the first one is the one that I think confuses people the most as far as its terminology, and that is the trade paperback. These are usually like the normal paperbacks. They come in multiple different heights. For example, this is technically a trade paperback even though it's a totally different height than this. And then of course there's the other more typically talked about type of paperback, which is the mass market paperback. These are typically shorter versions of the trade paperbacks and are typically also cheaper than trade paperbacks. And of course there are hardcovers. There are short and tall hardcovers, but I didn't really feel like I needed to put them into separate categories for this video because I have pretty much the same opinion on each of them, so I just lumped them into one hardcover group. So right off the bat, I tend to have the same opinion as most people on BookTube about mass market paperbacks, which is that I'm not really a huge fan of them. As seen by this copy of Game of Thrones that I have, which is used, I have not read it yet. It's so easy to break the spine on these things, and they're so small, and it's always like really hard. The font is almost always super tiny in these, and then if you want to be able to read the entire page, you have to break the spine to read it. It's a really annoying format for me to read personally. However, and this might be the slightly odd thing about my opinion, I do think that there are some books that work well as mass market paperbacks and kind of work with the broken spine. For example, I actually tend to associate high fantasy with mass market paperbacks because, you know, when you think of older high fantasy, you always think of mass market paperbacks with like really ugly covers that you can spot from a mile away. And that's kind of what I associate with mass market paperbacks. So yeah, having a high fantasy series or book in a mass market paperback form doesn't really bother me because I do associate high fantasy with mass market paperbacks. However, if given the opportunity, I probably would prefer to buy it in a trade paperback or in a hardcover. However, I will be replacing this copy of Game of Thrones eventually because I do have books 2 and 3 in the trade paperback copies. And between trade paperbacks and hardcovers, I don't really have a favorite. I really like both formats, and I tend to associate certain books with a certain format. For example, I really prefer the paperback copy of Ready Player One because I like the cover of the paperback copy much better than I like the hardcover copy. So I definitely prefer trade paperback for this. However, I purposely bought Night Film in hardcover even though I could have bought it for cheaper in paperback, mostly just because I associate the book with this cover and hardcover. So yeah, as far as preference between trade paperback and hardcover, it really just depends on the book because I like both formats pretty equally. And as far as format differences within a series, it's usually not something that bothers me too much, but depending on the situation, it is something that I want to fix. For example, when I first bought the Harry Potter books, the first 5 were all out in paperback, and so I got them in paperback, and then I got the hardcovers of 6 and 7 as they were released. However, about a year ago, the fact that my copies didn't match started to bother me because it is my favorite series, and I want it to match on my shelves, and I want to have beautiful hardcover editions of all of them, so I did end up repurchasing books 1 through 5 in hardcover, and I'm not bothered at all by the fact that I now have multiple copies of those 5 books. However, I'm 100% okay with the fact that my copies of The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance are in different formats, mostly because the covers match, they're roughly the same size, it's really not a big deal. However, I also haven't read those 2 books yet. Once I read them, I might completely fall in love with the series and feel the need to have matching editions on my shelves. But right now, I'm 100% happy with how they are. So moving on to book covers. Like several booktubers, I am a pretty big stickler on matching covers, and I get really annoyed with cover changes. However, I'm not quite as big of a stickler about matching covers as some people are, because although matching covers is my first priority, My second priority is to have the covers on my shelves that I really love. And the best example of this ever is the Across the Universe trilogy, because I don't know if y'all have seen this trilogy, but the first 2 books in the trilogy have the most gorgeous covers ever. And then they did a cover change for book 3 and it looks like poop. Okay, that's an exaggeration. The cover isn't terrible, but it does not match the first 2, and the first 2 were gorgeous. So once they released the 3rd book in the new cover, they also released paperback versions of the first 2 books with covers matching the 3rd book. However, on my shelves, or in boxes right now, I have the first 2 books in the beautiful, gorgeous hardcover, beautiful covers. And I have the 3rd book in the mismatched paperback. However, although it bothers me to have these mismatched covers on my shelves, it would bother me even more to have the first 2 books in covers that I didn't like when I could have them in the beautiful hardcover copies that I have. However, it's not necessarily this way with all series. For example, if there was another series, much like the Across the Universe trilogy, where the first 2 books came out in one cover and they changed the cover for the 3rd one, if I only slightly liked the first cover more than I liked the cover change, I'd probably just buy them all in the cover change edition. So matching covers are pretty important to me, but if I really, really love a certain cover of a book, I'm gonna get it regardless of whether or not it matches. And for me, covers matching is definitely more important than formats matching. For example, back to the Stormlight Archive series, if I had Words of Radiance in like the really nice UK paperback edition rather than the hardcover, that would bother me more than having one in paperback and one in hardcover, because they wouldn't even look like they went together. So yeah, those are my kind of weird and random opinions on book formatting and book covers. And I would love if y'all would go down in the comments and tell me what your opinions on these 2 are, because I think that it's super interesting and I love to hear other people's thoughts on this. As always, I will leave links down in the description to my blog, Twitter, and Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!